History Zone, where the past comes alive.
Abraham Lincoln sat alone in his private study, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the high-backed chair and scattered papers. His tall frame seemed even taller in the dim glow, a solemn figure hunched over a desk cluttered with reports from generals, letters from grieving families, and the ink-stained evidence of a nation struggling to rebuild. Mary Todd Lincoln entered quietly, her footsteps soft against the polished wooden floors. Her gown rustled faintly, a subtle reminder of the domestic world pressing in around the great events of history. She paused at the door, studying her husband for a long moment. "Abraham," she said gently, "you've been at that desk since sunset. Come, sit with me for a moment. You look weary." He raised his head slowly, his faint blue eyes meeting hers. There was a faint, weary smile, the kind that tried to reassure more than it revealed. "I cannot, my dear," he said softly. "There is too much to read, too much to consider. The war may be over, but the work of healing this nation has only begun." Mary stepped closer, her hand brushing against his shoulder. "You carry so much on your shoulders, Abraham. Even in this quiet night, I feel the weight pressing down upon you. Perhaps you need to rest." He shook his head slightly, a deep sigh escaping his chest. "I cannot rest while so many still suffer. I think of the soldiers, the widows, the children left behind, and of the nation that must now rebuild from ashes." His voice dropped to a whisper, almost to himself. "And yet, there is another thought I cannot shake." Mary tilted her head, concern flickering across her features. "Another thought? What is it?" Lincoln leaned back, his fingers steepled together as he gazed into the flame of the candle. "I think of dreams and premonitions, strange, dark visions that have come to me in sleep. They trouble me more now than ever. I cannot tell if they are the weight of my imagination or something more." Mary's eyes widened, the flicker of candlelight reflecting her fear. Do you mean about the war or about you?" He nodded slowly, his tone grave. "I have dreamed of sorrow, of funerals in this very house, of shadows where there should be light, and I have seen a coffin." Mary stepped closer, her hand trembling as she rested it upon his. "Abraham, tell me this is just a dream." He turned toward her fully now, his gaze steady but heavy. "I wish it were, my dear, but dreams sometimes carry truths that the waking mind cannot yet comprehend. I share them with you because you are the one I trust, you who know my heart better than any other soul in this world." The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the candle and the distant sounds of Washington at night. Mary's hand remained on his, a lifeline of comfort amidst the tension. Lincoln's eyes drifted back to the window, where moonlight illuminated the trees outside, casting long shadows across the ground. He seemed both present and elsewhere, lost in thoughts only he could navigate. "The nation will endure," he said finally, almost to himself. "The Union will endure, but I fear the cost that I may still pay in this fragile time." Mary squeezed his hand tightly, though her heart quivered at his words. "Whatever comes, Abraham, we will face it together." Lincoln allowed himself a faint, grateful smile, yet there was no mistaking the weight behind it. In the quiet of that April night, in the flickering candlelight of the White House, the first whispers of premonition had settled over the man who had carried a nation through its darkest hours. A nation free from war, yes, but the shadows of the future already reached toward him, unseen yet inexorable, like the tolling of a distant bell. And so the night stretched on, heavy and still, as Abraham Lincoln, the weary president and reluctant prophet of his own fate, sat alone among the papers, the shadows, and the candlelight, pondering what dreams might truly mean. The night deepened in the White House, shadows stretching long across the polished floors and ornate walls. Outside, the city was quiet, save for the distant clatter of a carriage on cobblestones and the occasional murmur of a late patrol passing through the grounds. Within, Abraham Lincoln sat in the dim glow of a single candle, the flickering flame casting eerie patterns on the walls. His tall frame leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, fingers intertwined. Mary Todd Lincoln approached him cautiously, sensing the heaviness in the room. "Abraham, you've been silent for hours. Please, tell me what weighs on your mind so." Her voice was soft, almost trembling. She had noticed his furrowed brow, the distant stare, and the unusual pallor that seemed to cling to him tonight. Lincoln looked up, eyes tired but lucid. "I dreamed again, Mary," he said, voice low, deliberate, "and this time the dream has stayed with me in waking hours." He paused, collecting his thoughts, choosing his words with care. "I was walking through the White House, though it was not as I knew it. The halls were dark, silent, yet filled with an unnatural stillness. As I moved from room to room, I came upon a scene that chilled me to the bone." Mary knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "What did you see, Abraham? Tell me, please." He swallowed and continued, his voice almost a whisper, yet each word struck with weight. "I came upon the East Room, and it was transformed. Black drapery hung from every wall. Candles burned dimly, casting shadows that twisted and writhed across the floor. And in the center, there lay a coffin, draped in black, polished, ominous, and around it stood a crowd of mourners, yet I knew none of them. They wept, some in silence, some openly, but all faces were strange and unfamiliar, and yet the sorrow they carried felt personal, as if it belonged to me." Mary's grip tightened on his hand, her knuckles pale. "Oh, Abraham, it was just a dream, a figment of your exhaustion." He shook his head slowly, his expression grave. "I wish it were so, Mary. I have had dreams before, but never one that clung to my thoughts so tightly, never one that made the walls of this house themselves seem to mourn." His eyes, normally so steady, flickered with an uncharacteristic unease. I awoke from it suddenly, startled, yet convinced I had seen a truth I could not deny. I have told others of my dreams in the past, and they dismissed them as imagination or fatigue. But this is real. Mary's voice faltered, but she tried to maintain calm. "Then we will face it together, Abraham. Dreams are shadows. They can warn or they can deceive. You are safe here, in our home, surrounded by those who love you." Lincoln's gaze shifted toward the window, where the moonlight pooled silently on the floor. "And yet," he said quietly, "I have felt as though I have glimpsed something inevitable. I have seen my own end, Mary. I know it sounds foolish, but in this vision, the mourning is for me. The coffin, the black drapes, it is my death that they grieve." Mary's lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Abraham, it is impossible. You have fought so hard, survived so much. You will see the nation healed. You cannot leave us now." He took her hand gently, attempting reassurance, even as a shadow of dread passed over his features. "Perhaps not. Perhaps the dream is but a warning, or perhaps it is a glimpse of fate itself. I cannot say which. All I know is that I must continue, for the sake of the people, for the sake of this country. Dreams cannot dictate the work that must be done." She leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. "I fear for you, Abraham. I do not know what the future holds, but I will not leave your side. We will meet whatever comes together." Lincoln closed his eyes for a moment, letting the comfort of her presence anchor him. Yet even in that quiet intimacy, the candle's flicker seemed to accentuate the long shadows on the wall, the same shadows he had seen in his dream. He could not shake the vision of black drapery, the coffin, the mourners who wept as if for a world they knew he would leave behind. "The night is long, and the dawn uncertain. I only pray that if my time comes, it does not come in vain, and that the nation endures beyond my own life." Mary nodded, holding him tightly, feeling the tremor of his words in her own heart. Outside, the world slept peacefully, unaware of the dread that had taken root within the White House walls. Inside, Abraham Lincoln and his wife sat in the flickering candlelight, shadows dancing around them as the premonition of a night yet to come whispered through the corridors of history.
April 1865 brought a fragile quiet to Washington, D.C., the kind that follows great storms. The streets buzzed with muted celebration, soldiers returning home, and families cautiously stepping outside after years of fear. But inside the White House, Abraham Lincoln's mind did not rest. Though the war's final shots had been fired and the Union restored, his heart remained heavy with the cost of victory. The countless lives lost, the cities scarred, and the families forever changed. Lincoln stood by a tall window in the Oval Office, the morning sun slanting across the polished floorboards, illuminating the dark circles beneath his weary eyes. He gazed out at the Capitol, its dome now bathed in sunlight, a symbol of a nation torn apart and stitched together by blood and resolve. Yet even in triumph, he felt the weight of his responsibilities, as if the war had not ended but merely paused. He turned slowly as William H. Seward, his Secretary of State, entered the room, carrying a stack of correspondence. "Mr. President," Seward began, "the reports from Richmond confirm that the last Confederate forces have surrendered. Lee's army is completely disbanded. The nation—" Lincoln raised a hand, stopping him. "I know the reports, William. I have read every dispatch myself. The war is over. And yet, can we ever truly measure the cost? Can we ever know what we owe to the families who will never see their sons, their husbands, their fathers again?" Seward paused, his expression sober. "History will remember your leadership, sir. You have brought this Union to peace." Lincoln's lips curved into a faint, sad smile, though his eyes betrayed a profound weariness. "History is not for the living, William. History is written by those who survive, while we who endure the pain carry it quietly within us." He walked to his desk and picked up a letter, the ink smudged where a grieving hand had trembled. He read it silently, then folded it carefully. "This letter, it is from a widow in Ohio. Her husband fell at Gettysburg. She writes not in anger, not in accusation, but in hope. Hope that I can somehow rebuild a nation worthy of their sacrifice." Mary Todd Lincoln entered quietly, standing behind him. Her eyes, red from sleep and worry, followed his movements. "Abraham," she said softly, "you do not have to carry it all alone. You have guided this country through unimaginable darkness. Perhaps now you may find a moment of rest." Lincoln turned to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Rest, Mary? Perhaps one day, but not yet. The war may be over, but the nation's wounds run deeper than any battlefield. Reconstruction will demand more from us than bullets ever did, and I must be ready." He paused, as if the weight of his thoughts pressed down upon him. "I think often of the soldiers, the men who marched, bled, and died for an ideal. I think of the citizens, of the mothers who will teach their children about this war. What will they remember? Will they learn? Will they forgive?" Mary approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Abraham, they will remember the man who stood for them." Lincoln's eyes drifted back to the window, watching the soldiers in the distance as they saluted the Union flag. "I hope you are right. I hope the nation remembers not only the victories, but the sacrifices, the human cost. For what is a union if it forgets the lives that built it?" For a moment, silence settled over the room, broken only by the rustling of papers and the distant echo of life beyond the White House walls. Lincoln's thoughts were heavy with reflection of the battles fought, the lives lost, the fragile peace just won. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet determination, a steady resolve that no dream, no vision could shake. Finally, he spoke, almost to himself, almost as a prayer. "We have reached the end of the war, Mary, and yet the path ahead is long. A nation healed is not built overnight, but I will see it through for the sake of those who cannot. I must see it through." Mary's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she nodded, understanding the burden he bore. Abraham Lincoln, the weary leader, the quiet dreamer, and the prophet of his own destiny, stood firm in the sunlight of the Oval Office, a man who carried the hopes of a nation alongside the shadows of his own dreams. Outside, Washington stirred. Inside, Lincoln's heart beat with a mix of triumph and foreboding, aware that even in peace, the echoes of war, and perhaps something darker, still lingered in the corridors of his mind. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the White House library, casting long shadows over the rows of books and polished wood. Abraham Lincoln stood by the fireplace, his tall frame leaning slightly against the mantel, eyes distant yet steady. Around him, his closest aides and advisors gathered: William H. Seward, Secretary of State, John Hay, his private secretary, and a few others who had served him tirelessly through the war. They had come at his summons, sensing that the president's request was unusual. "Gentlemen," Lincoln began, his deep voice calm but carrying an unusual weight, "I have asked you here not for counsel on policy, not for strategy, but for honesty." He paused, glancing from one familiar face to another. "I have had a dream, or perhaps a vision, and I feel it important to share it with you." A hush fell over the room. These men were accustomed to Lincoln's contemplative moods, his philosophical asides, his occasional levity. But tonight there was something different, a gravity in his tone that made even seasoned advisors lean in. He continued, choosing his words carefully. "I walked through the White House, though it was not as it appears in waking hours. The halls were dark, and silence hung heavy. In the East Room, I saw black drapery covering the walls. Candles flickered, casting shadows that seemed alive, moving as if in mourning. And in the center, there lay a coffin draped in black, polished, unyielding. Around it stood mourners, faces unfamiliar, yet I felt their sorrow deeply.
and I recognized that it was for me. A low murmur passed among the aides. Seward's brow furrowed, his hand gripping his notebook. "Mr. President, surely this is but a dream. You have endured unimaginable trials. Perhaps your mind is merely processing them." Lincoln shook his head slowly. "I thought so at first, William, but this vision does not fade with the morning. It lingers like a shadow at the edges of my mind. I have told my wife, and even she cannot dismiss its weight. I do not share this lightly, nor do I seek to alarm you unnecessarily, but a man who leads a nation, who carries the lives of countless others in his hands, must also reckon with his own mortality." John Hay, ever the pragmatic observer, leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, dreams often carry fear, anxiety, and exhaustion. They are shadows of the mind, not prophecies." Lincoln regarded him calmly, though his eyes held a quiet intensity. "Perhaps, John, but consider this. If a dream speaks of what may come, is it folly to acknowledge it, or is it prudence to prepare the heart and mind for the unknown?" He let the question hang in the room. None answered immediately. Seward cleared his throat, choosing his words with caution. "And what would you have us do, Mr. President? We are here to serve you, to counsel, to advise, but we cannot prevent dreams from manifesting into reality." Lincoln's gaze softened, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "No, but sharing them, confronting them openly brings clarity. It allows those I trust to walk beside me, even in shadows." He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes. "I ask only that you keep this between us. It is not a matter for public discussion. The nation must see me as steadfast, unshaken. Yet you may know the truth that even the leader is not immune to fear." Hay nodded, his expression serious. "We understand, sir, and we will respect your trust." Lincoln exhaled slowly, as if releasing the tension that had held him captive all afternoon. "Thank you, my friends. The war is over, yes, but the shadows linger, and even as I prepare to guide this nation toward healing, I must also prepare myself for whatever may come." A silence fell over the library once more. The men exchanged glances, understanding the gravity of the moment, yet unwilling to voice the fear that hovered unspoken between them. Lincoln's calm, tall figure stood against the light streaming through the windows, a man of immense strength and quiet vulnerability, the weight of history balanced precariously upon his shoulders. As they left the room one by one, each man carried not only the burden of the nation, but also a private, shared awareness of the president's premonition. In the quiet aftermath, Lincoln remained by the fireplace, staring into the glowing embers, contemplating the fragile line between fate and free will, between duty and mortality. And in that quiet, he resolved to continue, undaunted, even as shadows whispered of the night yet to come. The night settled heavily over the White House, wrapping its stately walls in a quiet that felt almost unnatural. Outside, the faint sounds of Washington at rest, distant carriage wheels, the rustle of trees in a spring breeze offered a semblance of peace. But inside the Lincoln household, tranquility was elusive. In the dimly lit parlor, Mary Todd Lincoln paced slowly, her thoughts tangled and restless. Candlelight danced across her delicate features, illuminating worry etched deep into her eyes. She stopped by a window, pressing her hand to the cool glass. The moon hung low and pale, casting a silver glow across the grounds. Mary's mind wandered back to the dream Abraham had shared, the black-draped East Room, the coffin, the mourners whose faces were unknown yet achingly familiar. It was not merely the dream itself that haunted her, but the weight with which he carried it, the calm acceptance that seemed both resolute and unsettling. "Abraham," she whispered, though he was not yet in the room, "you must rest. You cannot shoulder all the burdens of this nation alone." Her voice trembled, betraying the fear she tried so hard to conceal. The tall figure of the president emerged from the shadowed hallway, moving slowly toward her. His eyes, tired yet steady, met hers. "Mary," he said softly, "I know your mind does not rest either. You feel the darkness that lingers in my dreams as if it creeps into your own." She turned to face him fully, a tremor in her hand as she reached for his. "I do, Abraham. I cannot shake it. The images you described, they linger with me. I dream of them as if they were my own. I see the black drapery, the coffin, and I hear the sorrow that does not belong to anyone but you." Lincoln took her hand in both of his, their fingers intertwining. "I wish I could tell you it is merely a dream, Mary. I wish I could promise that the future holds only peace and safety. But some things, it seems, cannot be denied." Her breath caught in her throat. "Then we must face it together. Whatever comes, I will not leave your side. But Abraham, I fear this is more than a dream. I feel it deep in my bones. A shadow lingers over us that cannot be explained by logic or reason." He drew her closer, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Mary, your intuition is a gift. You have always felt what others overlook. Perhaps this shadow is simply a warning, or perhaps it is the reflection of the burdens I already carry. Either way, your courage steadies me more than I can say." Mary's gaze fell to the floor for a moment, her thoughts racing back to the countless nights she had lain awake alone, fearing for him, fearing the fragile life that always seemed on the edge of history's great upheavals. "I have seen men like you endure battles, Abraham. I have seen your strength carry this nation through unimaginable darkness. But even the strongest men, they are not invincible." Lincoln smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "No, I am not invincible. I have known my share of sorrow and fear, and I have leaned on you when the weight threatened to crush me. And yet, even knowing this, I cannot turn away from the duty before me. The nation demands it, and so I endure." She pressed her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Then I will endure with you," she whispered. "I will stand by you, and when the shadows come, we will face them together. I will not falter, Abraham, no matter what the dream foretells." He held her tightly, the warmth of her presence a fragile shield against the cold premonitions that hung in the corners of his mind. "Mary, you have always been my anchor. Even when I wander into darkness, even when visions trouble me, it is your love that brings me back to the light. You are my strength when mine wanes." They remained in the quiet of the parlor, candlelight flickering across the walls, shadows lengthening as if echoing the unease that neither dared name aloud. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the tension within the White House. Inside, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln shared a moment of fragile intimacy, a brief respite from the weight of history and the premonitions that haunted them both. And though they did not speak it aloud, both felt it. The night was long, and the shadows that had entered their lives were far from gone. The whispers of fate lingered, soft and insistent, and both husband and wife knew that the coming days would test not only their strength, but the very resilience of a nation emerging from its greatest trial. The evening of April 13th, 1865, arrived with a delicate hush, as if the world itself held its breath. Washington, D.C. lay bathed in the soft glow of gas lamps and the silver sheen of a crescent moon. For many, it was a night of celebration, of the Union's victory, of the Confederate surrender, and of the hope for a nation reborn. But within the corridors of power, a quiet tension lingered, unseen by most, felt only by those attuned to the fragility of life and the shadows of fate. Abraham Lincoln, tall and contemplative, stood in the East Room of the White House, gazing out the windows at the darkened streets below. He had spent the afternoon reviewing correspondence, letters of gratitude from generals and citizens alike, and notes from Mary Todd expressing both pride and concern. His face was calm, almost serene, but his eyes betrayed a depth of weariness and thought. He had shared his dreams with Mary, with a few trusted aides, yet even that did not alleviate the unease that crept at the edges of his mind. Mary Todd Lincoln approached quietly, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of the shadows that haunted them. "Abraham," she said softly, "you must try to rest. Tomorrow is the theater, and the evening will be long. You have carried the nation for years. Please, let tonight be calm." Lincoln smiled faintly, brushing a hand over hers. "I will try, Mary, and yet I cannot help but think of the cost of all we have endured. Every soldier, every citizen, every family who has suffered, the weight of it rests with me still. The nation rejoices, but the mind cannot always rejoice so easily." Despite the tension, preparations for the evening were meticulous. The Lincolns would attend a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater, a rare moment of levity and entertainment in the heavy days following war. Soldiers and dignitaries were invited, and the excitement outside the theater contrasted sharply with the quiet anxiety inside the president's home. By late afternoon, Lincoln retired to his private chambers briefly, donning his black frock coat, the tall stovepipe hat resting against the wall. He moved with deliberate calm, masking the swirl of thoughts within. Mary lingered near the doorway, watching him with a mixture of admiration and fear. "Promise me you will be careful," she whispered. "The world is healing, yes, but darkness has a way of finding even the brightest light." Lincoln took her hand, holding it with gentle reassurance. "Mary, the world is full of darkness, and I have walked through much of it already. Yet I cannot let fear dictate my life, not now, not when so many depend on courage and resolve. Come with me to the theater tomorrow. Let us witness the joy and hope that remain in the hearts of our people." As evening deepened, Washington's streets grew quiet. The gas lamps flickered like distant stars, illuminating the path ahead. Lincoln and Mary dined lightly, a quiet meal taken in companionable silence. He spoke little, but his gaze often lingered on the window, as if weighing the shadows beyond. Outside, the city seemed peaceful, unaware of the undercurrents that would shape history in mere hours. At the theater, the preparations mirrored the city's optimism. Chairs were arranged, curtains drawn, and the stage set for comedy. Yet behind the scenes, a conspiratorial plan was already in motion. John Wilkes Booth and his accomplices moved through Washington with intent, their faces masks of determination, their hearts driven by a deadly purpose. The contrast between the theater's cheerful promise and the darkness stalking it was stark, almost cinematic in its tension. Lincoln retired early that night, hoping for rest, yet sleep was elusive. The premonitions, the dreams, and the weight of the war pressed upon him. Mary's presence offered comfort, but even her love could not dissolve the unease lingering in the quiet moments before sleep. As the candlelight flickered in the bedroom, casting dancing shadows on the walls, the President of the United States drifted into a restless slumber, unaware that the night ahead would mark a turning point not only in his life, but in the destiny of a nation. And so, as Washington slept, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln lay side by side, both conscious of history, both conscious of mortality, and both unaware that tomorrow night would be the darkest their lives would ever see. The shadows had begun to gather, silent and patient, waiting for the hour when fate would claim its due. The night of April 13th, 1865 in Washington, D.C. was quiet on the surface, but beneath the city's calm, a storm of malice had already been set into motion. John Wilkes Booth, a man of charm and theatrics, moved with a predator's precision through the streets of the capital. Once celebrated as an actor on stage, Booth had long nurtured a dark obsession, the destruction of Abraham Lincoln. He believed with bitter conviction that by killing the president, he could avenge the South and strike at the heart of the Union he despised. Booth's footsteps echoed softly against the cobblestones as he approached the boarding house where he and his co-conspirators had convened earlier that evening. There, the plot had been refined, each detail rehearsed with meticulous care. Lewis Powell was tasked with attacking Secretary of State William Seward, George Atzerodt with Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Booth himself would take the life of the president. The conspirators spoke in hushed, urgent tones, their eyes alight with fanatic resolve. "Tonight," Booth said, his voice low and controlled, "the nation will tremble. Lincoln's life ends, and with it the symbol of this tyranny falls. The South will rise again. History will remember this night." His words carried a mix of theatrical flair and deadly certainty. Those around him nodded, a chilling sense of camaraderie binding them in purpose. Yet even in his fervor, Booth's mind was calculating. He had studied Lincoln's habits, the president's predictable attendance at Ford's Theater, the layout of the theater, the position of the presidential box. Everything was in place. "Timing is everything," Booth whispered to himself, fingers brushing the edge of the carefully concealed derringer he carried. One moment, one shot, and the world changes. Meanwhile, across town, the atmosphere in the White House contrasted sharply with the darkness gathering in the city's shadows. Abraham Lincoln, oblivious to the danger that had stalked him for months, prepared for an evening of light-hearted theater. His thoughts were on the performances, the soldiers and citizens who would attend, the smiles he might witness as relief spread through the post-war capital. He could not know that danger had already slipped past the vigilant city guards, silent and patient like a shadow waiting to strike. Mary Todd Lincoln, ever perceptive, felt a restless unease. She had noticed a tension lingering in Abraham's gaze all day, the premonitions he had shared in whispered confidences. "Something presses on us tonight," she murmured, though she does not know what it is. Her intuition, often sharp and haunting, whispered a warning she could not yet fully name. She clutched her shawl tightly, a small talisman of comfort in the face of unseen peril. At Ford's Theater, preparations continued. Stagehands adjusted props, actors rehearsed their lines, and ushers arranged seating for the evening's performance. The theater was alive with energy, the promise of laughter and entertainment masking the dark intentions lurking nearby. Booth observed from the shadows, studying the audience and the stage with the eye of a man who had rehearsed this night in his mind countless times. Every detail mattered, every movement calculated. He was both actor and predator, performing a deadly drama of his own devising. Back at the White House, Lincoln dressed in his familiar black frock coat and tall stovepipe hat. Mary lingered near him, trying to offer reassurance even as her own heart fluttered with unspoken fear. "The world is ready for joy tonight, Abraham," she said softly. "Let us be part of that joy, even for a brief evening." Lincoln smiled faintly, his gaze steady but thoughtful. "Yes, Mary, joy is necessary. We must let the nation breathe, even as shadows linger at the edges." He adjusted his coat and offered her his arm. "Come, and let us witness the strength and resilience of our people, for they are the true heart of this union." The city of Washington, oblivious to the storm that had already begun to stir, continued its quiet evening, but Booth and his conspirators moved silently through the streets, shadows among shadows, carrying with them the deadly certainty of what they intended. Across the city, the president and his wife prepared for a night of theater, unaware that history itself was poised on the knife's edge, waiting for a single, fatal act to change everything.
The evening air hung heavy with the scent of oil lamps and freshly polished wood as the Lincolns arrived at Ford's Theater. The street outside buzzed with quiet excitement, citizens, soldiers, and dignitaries moving through the gas-lit sidewalks, oblivious to the shadow that stalked the night. Abraham Lincoln, tall and composed, offered his arm to Mary, whose fingers gripped his lightly, betraying both anticipation and unease. She sensed the tension lingering around him, the invisible weight of burdens only he could carry, and she held her breath, hoping the night would pass without incident. Inside, the theater was alive with energy. Actors hurried through final rehearsals, their laughter and chatter filling the wings and balconies. The audience filtered into their seats, anticipating an evening of light-hearted comedy after years of war and suffering. For most, it was a night to celebrate the fragile return of peace. For some, however, the night was poised to become the darkest in the nation's history. Lincoln and Mary ascended the narrow stairs to the presidential box, a small balcony above the stage, adorned with velvet drapery and cushioned chairs. The familiar faces of General Ulysses S. Grant and Major Henry Rathbone greeted them, a sense of camaraderie and celebration in their smiles. Yet even in these moments of normalcy, a subtle unease lingered in Lincoln's gaze, the memory of his recent dreams and premonitions weighing quietly upon him. Booth, lurking behind the scenes, moved with purpose. His eyes scanned the theater, resting briefly on the presidential box. The plan he had rehearsed for months was about to unfold. Every movement had been calculated, every second accounted for. He slipped into the shadows near the rear entrance, a small derringer hidden beneath his coat. His heartbeat was steady, deliberate, each step bringing him closer to the man he had vowed to kill, the symbol of the Union he despised. Back in the presidential box, Lincoln settled into his chair, Mary beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The play began, and the audience laughed at the comic timing of the actors, the rhythm of lines delivered with precision. For a moment, Abraham allowed himself to be swept into the ordinary human joy of it, the simple pleasure of watching laughter spread across the faces of others. He glanced at Mary, offering a faint smile, and she returned it, her own unease softened by this brief reprieve. Yet even as laughter filled the theater, shadows moved with silent intent. Booth crept along the corridor behind the stage, his eyes fixed on the box. His plan was simple, cruel, and precise. One shot, aimed at the president, and history would pivot irrevocably. The tension in the air was palpable, though no one in the theater sensed it. It was a tension that only the universe, in some unseen way, seemed aware of. The quiet hush before the storm, the calm before the inevitable. Lincoln's thoughts wandered as the play continued, reflecting on the fragile state of the nation. Victory had been won, yes, but the cost had been immense. He considered the soldiers returning home, the widows and orphans who would never see their loved ones again, and the task that awaited him in guiding a nation toward healing. He breathed deeply, trying to set aside his fears, the shadows from his dreams, and the whispers of premonition that had haunted him for weeks. Mary's hand squeezed his lightly, grounding him. "Abraham," she whispered, "let us enjoy this night. It is a gift, however fleeting. Do not let your mind dwell on shadows." He nodded, offering a small, faint smile, and turned his gaze to the stage. Laughter and applause rang out through the theater, a temporary balm against the darkness gathering unseen. But Booth, moving silently, approached the rear of the box. The dagger-like precision of fate, the cruel inevitability of history, pressed ever closer. In that moment, the theater held its breath. Actors on stage, audience in the hall, and the Lincolns in their box were all oblivious to the imminent collision of destiny and violence. Shadows lingered just beyond vision, waiting. History poised on a knife's edge, prepared to change forever with a single fatal act. And in the quiet intimacy of the presidential box, Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd sat together, unaware that the night they had entered in celebration would soon become the night the nation wept, the night that would etch their names indelibly into the annals of history. The fateful moment was approaching, and there was no turning back.
The laughter in Ford's theater rang sharply against the velvet walls, a chorus of joy echoing through the hall as the actors delivered their lines. Abraham Lincoln leaned back in the presidential box, allowing himself a rare moment of lightheartedness. Mary Todd Lincoln's hand rested gently on his arm, a delicate tether to the present, as the distant shadows of his dreams faded momentarily into the background of a night filled with simple human laughter. And then it happened. A single precise shot cracked the air like thunder. The sound, barely audible above the applause, struck with a violence that no one in the theater could fully comprehend in the instant. Abraham Lincoln slumped forward, a faint exclamation escaping his lips, and the weight of the world seemed to collapse upon the small box. Mary's cry pierced the room, shattering the illusion of joy and drawing the gaze of every spectator upward in horror. John Wilkes Booth, the man who had crept silently through the shadows, leapt from the rear of the box onto the stage with the grace of an actor and the deadly purpose of a predator. A cheer turned to panic as the audience realized the enormity of what had occurred. Booth's dagger flashed as he struggled briefly with Major Henry Rathbone, who had attempted to intervene, and then he vanished into the chaos, a phantom fleeing justice, even as the nation's heart stopped in stunned disbelief. Mary Todd Lincoln shrieked, pressing herself against her husband as attendants and aides rushed to the box. Abraham's head lolled backward, the life in his eyes dimming, but his hand still reached for her in a final gesture of reassurance. "Mary, my dear," he whispered, his voice faint but filled with love, leaving her clutching him in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Below, the theater erupted in confusion. Spectators screamed, some rushing toward the exits, others frozen in disbelief. Actors abandoned the stage mid-performance, their costumes and props forgotten as the reality of violence shattered the evening's entertainment. Ushers tried desperately to calm the crowd, but chaos reigned, a maelstrom of fear, horror, and disbelief. Major Rathbone, wounded in the struggle with Booth, staggered back into the box, supporting Mary Todd Lincoln as she sobbed uncontrollably. "We must get him out of here," he urged, glancing at Lincoln's still form. Attendants and doctors from the audience rushed to the box, lifting the stricken president with utmost care, their hands trembling even as they worked to stabilize him. The streets outside remained eerily calm, unaware of the tragedy unfolding within the theater's walls. A single carriage was summoned hurriedly, its wheels clattering against cobblestones as it carried the wounded president and the frantic Mary Todd Lincoln to the Peterson house just across the street. Inside that modest home, a small group of doctors attended to him, but the fatal nature of the wound was clear to all who beheld it. The room was hushed, broken only by Mary's weeping and the whispered prayers of those who knew that history was witnessing the end of a man who had carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Lincoln's breathing was shallow, each inhalation labored, each exhalation a reminder of the fragile thread upon which life balanced. He reached for Mary once more, a faint smile touching his lips despite the excruciating pain. "She will heal," he murmured, his voice fading. His eyes met hers for the last time, a silent farewell, a transmission of love, hope, and resignation. And then, gradually, the light in his eyes dimmed, leaving the room and the nation in stunned silence. Mary Todd Lincoln crumpled beside him, inconsolable, her hands clutching his as though she could anchor him to life with sheer force of will. Around them, doctors, aides, and friends moved in quiet, solemn motion, performing the rituals of care, even as they knew with sinking hearts that nothing could undo the wound inflicted by Booth's hand. Outside, the city of Washington remained blissfully unaware that its leader, its guiding light through war and uncertainty, had been struck down. Inside the Peterson house, time seemed suspended, stretched thin by grief, disbelief, and the enormity of history being written in real time. The night had begun with laughter and hope, but it ended in sorrow, fear, and the realization that a nation's grief had arrived, sudden, unrelenting, and irrevocable. Abraham Lincoln, the man who had carried so much for so long, had fallen, and in the quiet aftermath, as Mary Todd Lincoln wept and aides held back their own tears, the world began to grasp the magnitude of a tragedy that would forever echo through the annals of history.
The early morning light of April 15, 1865, crept slowly across the windows of the Peterson house, spilling pale beams over the room where Abraham Lincoln lay in his final hours. The world outside was waking to another day, unaware that history itself had been altered in the stillness of night. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the gentle whispers of Mary Todd Lincoln and the solemn murmurs of doctors who had done everything within their power, yet knew that fate had already claimed the life of a man who had carried a nation on his shoulders. Mary sat beside him, her hands intertwined with his, her tears falling quietly onto the hem of his coat. "Abraham, please, stay with me," she whispered, her voice raw and fragile. "The nation still needs you. I still need you." Lincoln's eyelids fluttered, his voice barely more than a breath. "Mary, my work, it is done, in part. But you must guide them, help the nation heal." His words were slow, deliberate, each syllable weighted with the enormity of the moment. "Tell them, the Union endures beyond me." Outside the windows, the city stirred, unaware that its guiding light was fading. Soldiers, citizens, and politicians alike would soon learn that the president who had led them through the darkest hours of civil war had been struck down in the theater of laughter, in a night that promised joy but delivered sorrow. The contrast was unbearable, yet perfectly tragic. A man who carried the hopes of a nation felled in a single, cruel instant. Mary Todd Lincoln pressed closer, her face a mask of grief and disbelief. "Abraham, look at me, listen to me. You are the father of this nation. Your courage, your wisdom, your vision, it will not die with you." Her voice broke as she spoke, her words both a plea and a tribute. "You have given everything, and the world will remember." Lincoln's hand twitched faintly in hers, a final gesture of acknowledgement. His eyes, once bright and piercing, softened into stillness. And then, slowly, inevitably, the breath that carried hope, grief, and resilience through a nation's darkest years ceased. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, was gone. The room fell into a hush, broken only by Mary's whispered sobs and the quiet movements of those surrounding him. Outside, Washington would soon awaken to the news, and across the country, a nation would grieve.
The Union, though victorious in war, now faced the first of many trials in the loss of the man who had guided it through fire and shadow. Yet even in death, Lincoln's legacy was already taking shape. Newspapers printed accounts of his leadership, his moral courage, and his unwavering commitment to justice and unity. Citizens gathered to mourn, some in silence, others in tears, all bearing witness to the loss of a man whose vision had preserved the nation. Memorials and speeches would follow, as would the solemn procession from Washington to Springfield, Illinois, where his final resting place would become a shrine to both a life and a dream larger than any single person. Mary Todd Lincoln, though shattered, understood even then the weight of what he had left behind. "He has gone," she whispered, "but he has not left. His ideals, his compassion, his courage, they remain. The nation lives because he lived. The people will carry him forward." Lincoln's life, his presidency, and his final hours reflected not only the struggles of a nation, but also the fragile human heart that bore them. His dreams, premonitions, and quiet reflections on mortality were not merely foreshadowing, they were a testament to the depth of his humanity. Even in his last moments, he thought not only of himself, but of the nation, its people, and the promise of unity beyond despair. As the sun rose higher, casting light across a nation now grieving, one truth remained undeniable. Abraham Lincoln had shaped history, and history would remember him. His courage in life, his vision in war, and his calm dignity in the face of death left an enduring legacy, a reminder that leadership is measured not just by victories won, but by the resilience, foresight, and compassion with which a leader carries the hearts of those entrusted to him. And so, Abraham Lincoln passed into history, his life and death intertwined with the destiny of a nation, leaving behind a legacy that would endure through the shadows of grief, the trials of Reconstruction, and the generations to come. His story, a blend of courage, foresight, and profound humanity, remains eternal, a testament to the power of conscience, vision, and the quiet strength of a man who dreamed not only for himself, but for a nation.